Hi, my name is Paul Grogan and welcome to the Gaming Rules official How to Play video for Key Market 2nd edition, designed by David Brain with development by Richard Breeze and published as part of the Key series of games by R&D Games. This video has been filmed using a 1st edition copy of the game from 2010, along with some prototype components for the things that have changed from the 1st edition, and some additional meeples supplied from other games. Key Market is a 2 to 4 player game which will take approximately 90 to 150 minutes to play depending on the player count. The game is set in the lands of Keydom, and over a period of 8 seasons you'll be placing workers into fields, harvesting resources, selling goods to the market, sponsoring and then promoting guild members, and upgrading your farmhouse so that your workers can retire. All of these things lead you to gaining gold, and the player with the most gold at the end of the game is declared the winner. I'll first go through the setup of the game and then we can dive into the rules. First, place the season board and the market board on the table. Leave space next to them for other things to be placed later in the setup. Sort out the resources and luxuries and count out a certain amount depending on the number of players in the game. In a 2-player game, use 12 of each, in a 3-player game, use 15 of each, and in a 4-player game, use 18 of each. Place them next to the market board as a general supply, and return any remaining ones back to the box. On the market board, place a number of resources of each type over the highest numbered spaces, depending on the number of players. 3 of each in a 2-player game, 2 of each in a 3-player game, and only 1 of each in a 4-player game. Do not place any luxuries on the market at the start of the game. Luxuries are not a resource. Each player takes a reference card, a player screen, and 10 workers in their chosen colour. As an alternative to using the meeples, you could use the counters that come with the game. These are 2-sided, use whichever side you prefer. One of the workers has a K on it. This is the key worker and in some games is special. Take one normal worker, not the key worker, from each player, mix them up and place them at random on the winter farming column of the season board. This indicates the order of play at the start of the game, with the player at the top going first and proceeding in this order. In a 3 or 4-player game, place the favour track next to the season board and then place another worker of each player in reverse order to that of the season board. Each player then gets a random farmhouse which is placed farmhouse side up in front of them. All players start the game with 1 of each resource. Remember, luxuries are not resources. These are kept behind your screen. Each player also starts the game with some gold. The start player gets 3 gold, then 2nd and 3rd players in turn sequence get 4 gold, and the 4th player gets 5 gold. Gold, like resources, are kept secret behind your screen, but your workers and your farmhouse must remain visible for everyone to see. Take the guild tiles, shuffle them, and then select a number of them at random depending on the number of players in the game. 5 tiles for a 2-player game, 6 tiles for a 3-player game, and 7 tiles for a 4-player game. It's recommended, however, for your first game to use the tiles with the lowest numbers on them. Return any remaining guild tiles to the box. These will not be used in this game. Take the set of 3 circular season markers with the number 2 on the back and place them face down at random onto the circular spaces on the season board. Take the 6 square season markers, shuffle them face down and place 3 of them at random on the square spaces. These 6 markers will be active during year 2. Place the remaining square and circular markers at random face up on top of the year 2 markers. These are the ones that will be active in year 1. Now it's time to set up the country boards. First, one player shuffles the 4 country boards under the table, randomly flipping some over to a different side. Then, the first player in turn order receives a random board and places it in the play area. They may not flip the board over to the other side. After placing the board you were given, you immediately place one of your workers, which could be the key worker, on any of the fields on that board except for the village in the middle. And then you immediately receive the resource matching the space where you placed the worker, in this case some fruit. The next player in turn order also receives a random board and must place it directly adjacent to the first one, so not like this, but like this. They then also place a worker onto a field and take a resource. However, this is a good point in the game to explain areas. A group of orthogonally connected fields generating the same resource, but irrespective of shape, is an area. So here, for example, this group of 3 apple fields is an area, and there may only be 1 worker in total per area. So going back to the setup example, the second player could not place their worker here because that field is part of an area where there's already a worker. Let's say they place it here instead and they receive a sheep. Players 3 and 4 do the same with their boards, following the same rules. The rules are slightly different in a 2-player game. First, place the small country board in the middle. Then, the first player must place their board completely alongside one of the long edges of the small board. The second player, however, may place their board so that it is slightly offset with the first large board. Note that neither player may place their initial worker on the small board. It can only be placed onto the large board that they placed. If playing with fewer than 4 players, return any leftover country boards to the box. Once the country has been created, each player must now pay for their farmhouse. This cost is depicted on the tile itself and includes one fixed cost, in this case a vegetable, and then one other resource. Each player pays the cost secretly by placing the resources in their hand, and then simultaneously players reveal what they have spent, and the resources are all placed on the market board, covering up the spaces from left to right. And with setup complete, you're now ready to proceed to the first round. The game plays over 2 years, each year divided into the 4 seasons of winter, spring, summer and autumn. Each season consists of 3 phases: the farming phase, market day and then end of season. When a player has carried out all of their actions in a particular phase, they move their marker to the next column. And once all markers are in the next column, the next phase begins. At the end of the first year, the markers are moved to the left of the board again, ready for year 2. I'll now go over the phases in order. In the farming phase, the first player in turn order will complete as many of the actions as shown on the reference card as they want to, but they must be carried out in order. However, since the game starts off in winter, none of your workers will be able to produce resources, and you don't have any guild members to promote. Therefore, the only actions that you can take in the first round are the first 2, but I am going to explain some of the others too. Just be aware that you can't do them at the start of the game. The first action is move workers. You pay any amount of gold to move your workers. For each gold paid, you may move one of your workers 1 field either horizontally or vertically, but not diagonally. So if I wanted to move my worker to start harvesting fruit, I would need to spend 2 gold to move it here and then here. If you want to move onto a village, you must pay an additional 5 gold, which seems really expensive, and it is, but getting into a village can be very useful. Remember during setup I explained that you cannot have 2 workers in the same area. Well, that rule applies to the whole game. So here, the green player could not move their worker onto the sheep field because there's already a blue worker in that area. Also, a player may not have 2 of their own workers adjacent to each other, even diagonally. So the red player could not move into this village here, for example, because it's diagonally adjacent to another of their workers. You can, however, temporarily break these movement rules whilst moving. They only apply at the end of your move. So here, for example, green could move through an area occupied by the blue player temporarily, as long as it's placed legally at the end of its move. The second action is hiring a worker. You can hire 1 additional worker at this point. It costs 1 gold for each worker you currently have on the country boards. So if you were to hire a worker in the first round of the game, it would cost you 1 gold, as you only have 1 worker currently in the country. The next one you hire would cost 2 gold, and so on. The worker is taken from your unused supply, and you could place your key worker if you wanted to. Or, if you have a worker in a guild, you could take it from there, but you probably wouldn't want to. You cannot hire a worker already working in the fields, nor a worker that has retired. I'll explain how you get a retired worker later on. The new worker is placed on the board following the normal rules. No 2 workers in the same area in total. You cannot have 2 of your workers adjacent to each other, and you cannot place the new worker directly onto a village. Action 3 is receiving resources and luxuries from your workers out in the country. The shape of the field that the worker is in, square or circle, determines how many things it produces. Circular fields normally produce 1, and square fields normally produce 2, as depicted on the season board. However, this is modified by the season markers which you placed out at random during setup. The circular markers increase the production of the depicted resource from 1 to 3, while the square season markers reduce production of the depicted resource to 0 for that season. Here, for example, if it was spring, all circular spaces produce 1, except for circular vegetable spaces that produce 3. All square spaces produce 2, except for square fruit spaces that produce 0. And note that in winter, every circular and square space produce nothing, except for villages that produce 1 luxury. Just going back to areas again, remember you can only have one worker per area, but the size of the area does not affect production. It's purely based on the field where the worker is. The supply of resources and luxuries is limited. If there are not enough for you to take everything you produce, you get 1 gold for each resource or luxury that you don't get. Action 4 is promoting one of your guild members, and I'm actually going to skip explaining this at this point. I'll cover the guilds in more detail later on, but remember, promoting one of your guild members is something that you can do in this phase. Action 5 is upgrading your farmhouse into a nice shiny manor house. You can only do this once per game, and the cost to do so is the same as it was to construct the farmhouse during setup, plus 1 additional luxury. When you upgrade your farmhouse, flip it over. A manor house gives 3 benefits. It's worth 15 gold at the end of the game. During market day, which I'll explain later, you can sell batches of up to 3 goods instead of 2. And now you can retire your workers, which is the final action to explain for the farming phase. To retire a worker, you must pay 4 different resources, as depicted here on the manor house. However, you may use 1 and only 1 luxury as if it were 2 resources. Therefore, to retire, instead of paying 4 different resources, you could just pay 2 different resources and 1 luxury. You then retire one of your workers from the country or from a guild. You cannot retire an unused worker. I mean, come on, they've not done a day's work in their life, how do they get to retire in a nice manor house? Although it might look like there are only 3 spaces on the manor house for retired workers, there's actually no limit, as shown by the multiple circles on the rightmost space. Retired workers are worth 15 gold at the end of the game, and they are now considered locked. They cannot be brought back to work in any way for the rest of the game. Remember that each player carries out as many of these actions as they want to in player order according to the season board. So player 1 carries out all of their actions, then player 2 and so on. Once you've carried out all of your actions, you move your player marker to the market day column. And when all markers are in the next column, the farming phase is over and market day begins. In the market day phase, each player must send at least 1 resource or luxury to sell at the market. But what if you don't have anything to sell? Well, in this case, you must lift your player screen to prove that you don't have anything, and as a consequence, the other players see how much gold you have, which is normally kept secret. Assuming you can sell things, decide what you want to sell in secret and conceal them in your hand. Once all players have decided, everyone reveals what they took to the market and then places those items onto their farmhouse so that everyone can see easily what will be sold that round. Then, in player order according to the season board, each player chooses to either sell a batch of resources or luxuries to the market, or take one of the guild actions shown here. And this process repeats with players continuing to take turns until all players have sold all of the goods that they took to the market and have taken 1 guild action. And you must take 1 guild action at some point in this phase. So in other words, if you sell all of your goods and haven't yet taken your guild action, then when it's your turn again, you must take your guild action. Or, if you have taken your guild action before selling all of your goods, then you must continue to take turns selling goods until you have none left. I'll explain selling first. When you sell goods on your turn, you choose 1 or 2 of the same type and receive an amount of gold per good as indicated by the highest visible number for the appropriate good on the market board. So here, for example, if you want to sell 2 fruit, the current price is 4 gold, so you will get 8 gold. Remember, if you have a manor house, you may sell batches of up to 3 goods instead of 2. Then you place one of the goods you sold on the market board, thereby reducing the price, and if you sold 2 or 3 goods, you place the others back in the supply. The lowest price a good can reach is 1, and when the value is 1, then 1 good from each batch sold continues to be placed in the rightmost space, which can hold any number of markers, but the price stays at 1. Next, your guild action. As described on your reference card, you may only do 1 of these per season, and you have a choice of 6 possible actions. Once you have taken your guild action, move your marker on the season board to the next column. Remember, if you still have goods to sell, you continue to take turns, but moving the marker indicates that you have now taken your guild action. Most of the guild actions require you to pay resources, either 2, 3 or 4. These resources must come from behind your screen. Any goods that you sent to the market cannot be used to make this payment. And as shown here, the resources must be all of different types. Remember though that 1 luxury may be used as any 2 resources. All goods spent are placed back in the supply. The guild actions are as follows. Sponsor an apprentice. This is where the guild tiles come into play. You can sponsor a new apprentice into any of the guilds as long as you do not already have a worker in that guild. The cost of sponsoring is 2 different resources as indicated here. Remember, 1 luxury can count as 2 resources. You place one of your workers onto one of the bottom spaces in that guild. If there are no empty spaces available, you cannot sponsor an apprentice into that guild until a space becomes available. Normally, you will use one of your unused workers for this, but you could also take a worker from another guild or from a country board. An apprentice does 2 things. First, each guild has a set of special abilities, and by being on the bottom row, you gain access to that ability. The abilities of the guild tiles are all fully explained in the rulebook. But another important thing to note is the number in the space. This is gold, i.e. points, at the end of the game. Most apprentice spaces are worth 5 gold, but this is not always the case. I said earlier on that in some games the key worker is special, and that depends on whether you are using guild number 4, the guild of key workers. If you're not using this guild, the key worker is just like any other normal worker. But if you are using this guild, the key worker is improved if you have someone on this guild tile. The second guild action to explain is promoting to a craftsman. This is where you simply move an apprentice up to the middle row on a guild tile. The cost of doing this is 3 different resources, or 1 luxury and 1 resource. You can only promote if there is space available. A craftsman gives you access to the next ability printed on the guild tile. And at this point, I want to mention a difference between the guild tiles. Compare these 2. If you look at the Taskmaster's Guild, you will see that the banners that contain the abilities are connected together. This means that when you have a craftsman, you also still have the ability of the apprentice banner below. Whereas the Guild of Master Craftsmen, the banners are not connected. This means that when you promote from an apprentice to a craftsman, you lose the apprentice ability, but you gain the craftsman ability instead. Craftsmen are normally worth 10 gold at the end of the game, but again, some guilds are different. Action 3 is promoting to Guild Master, and you can probably work out this one already. It allows you to promote a craftsman to a master, as long as there is space to do so. The cost of promoting to a master is 4 different resources, or 1 luxury and 2 different resources. You cannot use 2 luxuries. Masters give you access to the top ability of the guild, which, if the banner has a yellow shade, means that it only applies during end of game scoring. And masters are usually also worth 15 gold at the end of the game, but again, this can vary depending on the guild. Action 4 is retiring a worker. This is done in the same way as I described earlier. You can only do it if you have a manor house, you pay 4 different resources, and place your worker on your manor house. Action 5 is buying 1 or 2 items of the same type from the market, and this can be really important because it's your only chance to buy things, and remember, you need different resources for carrying out many of the actions that I've mentioned so far. Choose what you want to buy from the market board. The cost per good is again the highest visible number, so here, if you wanted to buy 2 fish, that would cost you 2 gold each for a total cost of 4 gold. You take the fish from the market and place them behind your screen. Because they are behind your screen, you therefore cannot sell them again at the market this season. And you can only buy things that are available in the market. So here, you could not buy any wheat. The final guild action available to you is very simple. You just take 5 gold from the supply, minus 1 for each worker you have on the country boards. So here, Red would gain 3 gold, as they have 2 workers in the country. So my advice is not to take this action if you have 5 or more workers in the countryside. If you do, this action will not get you any gold. So why would you take the action? Well, you must take 1 guild action per season, and this might be the only one that you can take. And you cannot voluntarily remove workers from the board at this stage. That's only possible later on. In a 3 or 4 player game, taking cash also allows you to move your marker on the favour track to the top space, shifting everyone else down. The favour track will become relevant at the end of the season. This phase happens at the end of every season in the game except for autumn of year 2, when you skip straight ahead to the end of the game instead. There are 4 steps to be carried out in order. Step 1. Adjust market prices. On the market board, look at each row individually and remove a number of markers from that row as indicated at the top of the market board based on the position of the rightmost marker in that row. So here, the rightmost fruit has a -1 above it, so 1 fruit is removed. The rightmost wheat has a 0 above it, so no wheat is removed. The rightmost vegetable are -2 above it, so 2 are removed, and so on. Step 2 is removing the season markers, and this only happens in spring, summer and autumn of year 1. You simply remove the 2 season markers for the season that has just ended, revealing the 2 markers underneath, which are then flipped over so that you can see what the production for that season will be in year 2. Step 3 is paying for the workers in the country. In player turn order, each player must either pay 2 gold for each worker on the country boards or remove the workers that they decide not to pay. So here, for example, Blue could choose to remove this worker and then pay 4 gold in wages for the remaining 2 workers. Note that even in winter, when only the workers in the villages produce, you're still required to pay for all of your workers. Paying people for not doing any work? Shocking. But seriously, you might want to consider not paying them and then hiring them again next season when they will be productive. But remember, you can only hire 1 new worker per season. Step 4 is the new player order. The player with the fewest workers on the country boards places their marker to the top of the farming space on the next column. They will be the first player in the next season. The player with the second fewest workers will be the second player, and so on. In case of a tie, look at the favour track. And this is easier explained with an example. This is the situation. Blue has 2 workers in the country, green and yellow have 3, and red has 4. First, Blue moves their marker to the top space of the farming column for the next season, because they have the fewest workers. Since green and yellow tie, we look to the favour track, and yellow is ahead of green, so yellow becomes the second player next season, but then must place their favour marker onto the bottom of the favour track. Green will be third next season, and red will be fourth. Note that in a 2-player game there is no favour track. If there's a tie between the players, the player markers are simply swapped over, so whoever was first becomes second. There's no end of season phase in autumn of year 2. Instead, the game ends and you add up the points. Clear the market and season board and then turn them over to track everyone's gold. The scoring is summarised on the reference card. 15 gold if you have a manor house, 15 gold for each retired worker, guild members as indicated on the guild tiles, here for example Blue gets 25 gold. Also add on the gold for the masters that give end of game scoring at this point, which is the yellow shaded banners. Gold coins behind your screen also count, and then each pair of identical resources or luxuries gets 5 gold. So here you would score an extra 10 gold. The player with the most gold is declared the winner. In 3 or 4 player games, ties are broken by whoever is highest on the favour track, and in a 2-player game, it's the player who was first in turn order during autumn of year 2. And that is how you play Key Market. I hope you found this video useful in learning how to play the game, and if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. For more of my videos, including some playthrough videos, please subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click the little bell so that you'll be reminded of any future videos. Thanks again to R&D Games for sponsoring this video, and to all of my Patreon supporters who help keep the channel going. Until next time, take care, and thanks for watching. Gaming Rules is proudly sponsored by Game Toppers, upgrading your gaming experience. Visit GameToppersLLC.com.